Good evening. Here's what's coming up on the program this hour. Russia widens its fire on Ukraine, hitting a military training base near the Ukrainian border with Poland. Ukrainians in Kherson protest against Russian occupation of their city. Plus, tragedy after fleeing the conflict in Ukraine as one person dies, more injured when a bus carrying refugees goes off the road in Italy. A warm welcome to our viewers here in Nigeria and around the world. Thank you for joining me, Amarachi Ubani, this full hour of our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. What's happened in the last couple of hours? Russia confirms carrying out the attack on Ukraine's Yavoriv training facility west of the country, but near the border with Poland. Russia claims a strike there killed up to 180 foreign mercenaries and destroyed a large amount of weapons supplied by outside nations. Ukraine had earlier said 35 people were killed and more than 130 people were wounded in the attack. Locals say up to 30 missiles were fired at the International Center for Peacekeeping and Security, although some were intercepted before they hit. The U.S. says none of its personnel were in the site at the time and no NATO official was there either. Following the attack, Ukraine has renewed calls for a no-fly zone above the country, even though the U.S. says it makes no sense for the war to be escalated between two nuclear powers. There's more on day 18 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Russian airstrike on a large Ukrainian military facility near the border with NATO member Poland on Sunday killed 35 people and wounded 134, as local officials report intense Russian attacks around the country. The incident, just 15 miles from the Polish border, marks a significant escalation of the conflict, especially because of its close proximity to Poland, a NATO member. Polish President Andrzej Duda, in an interview on Sunday, said that the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine by Russia would be a game changer, and NATO would have to think seriously about how to respond. When asked if the use of chemical weapons by Vladimir Putin would be a red line for NATO, at which point it has to get involved, Duda told the BBC that if he uses any weapons of mass destruction, then this will be a game changer in the whole thing.
Well, of course, everybody hopes that he will not dare do that he will not use weapons of mass destruction, neither chemical weapons, nor biological weapons, nor any form of nuclear weapons. Everybody is hoping that this is not going to happen. But as we say in Poland, using a little bit of an English expression, if he uses any weapons of mass destruction, then this will be a game changer in the whole thing. And for sure, the North Atlantic Alliance and its leaders, led by the United States, will have to sit at the table and they will really have to think seriously what to do. Because then it starts to be dangerous, not only for Europe, not only for our part of Europe or our region, for Central Europe, but for the whole world.
US President Joe Biden had said NATO would defend every inch of its territory if Russia's invasion of Ukraine spills into member states of the Western Defense Alliance. Civilians who are caught up in this conflict have been trying to escape the city of Irpin on Sunday as Russian airstrikes hit the city. Soldiers and volunteers helped elderly people and children to cross over the river and walk as roads and bridges throughout the northern town are destroyed or severely damaged.
Yeah, my parents still in Irpin, unfortunately. I'm trying to get them off for like 6 days already. I'm contacting with a lot of volunteers and different services, but it's, as I said, my mom, she doesn't move, and that's why it's a more complicated task to get them off.
Over in the eastern Ukrainian town of Volnovakha, the region has been completely destroyed following the Russian invasion, but fighting continues for territory there to prevent a Russian encirclement. Donetsk Governor Pavlo Krylenko made this known on Saturday. Volnovakha was reported to be in control of pro-Russian separatists, with sporadic fights on the outskirts emerging until recently. The infrastructure in the town is heavily damaged or destroyed. In the meantime, President Volodymyr Zelensky, in a video address on Sunday, has announced that nearly 125,000 people have been evacuated via humanitarian corridors from conflict zones in Ukraine. This comes as more humanitarian aid for the besieged city of Mariupol is expected to arrive after being held up overnight in Berdyansk.
Heavy shelling has been reported in the Ukrainian city of Chernihiv, leaving firefighters struggling to rescue residents from destroyed buildings. One video uploaded on social media shows a state of emergency services of one battling the blaze on a building. Residents being taken out of the building down an external emergency ladder. One of them had to be put on a stretcher there. In eastern Ukraine, Russian troops are trying to surround Ukrainian forces as they advance from the port of Mariupol in the south and second city, Kharkiv, in the north. British intelligence says Russian forces are advancing from Crimea, which Russia annexed from Ukraine in 2014, and they're trying to circumvent the city of Mykolaiv as they look towards Odessa. In other developments, the UK's Finance Minister Rishi Sunak has called on more British companies to wind down their existing investments in Russia, saying new investments should be halted after President Vladimir Putin's decision to invade Ukraine. Several major British firms have announced they will cease or reduce their interests in Russia, such as power giants BP, Shell, and investment firm Aviva.
Since the start of the Russian invasion, we've seen widespread commitments from firms and investors to end their involvement with Russian assets, or in other words, to divest. Companies such as BP, Shell, Aviva, M&G and Vanguard, to name but a few, have already announced their intention to reduce or sell holdings in Russia. I want to make it crystal clear that if firms or investors decide that they need to end their financial relationship with Russia, then the government fully supports you. And when I met leading businesses last week, I welcomed the consensus on the need to inflict maximum economic pain on Putin and his regime. Until recently, the UK companies held tens of billions of pounds of investments in Russian assets. While I recognise that it may be challenging to wind down existing investments, I believe there is no argument for new investment in the Russian economy. I am urging asset owners and managers to think very carefully about any investments that would in any sense support Putin and his regime. As the Prime Minister has said, diplomatically, politically, economically, and eventually militarily, this hideous and barbaric venture of Vladimir Putin must end in failure.
Back in Ukraine, a member of the parliament, Lisha Vassilinov, has warned that Russia will not stop at invading Ukraine. It's only a matter of time before Russia invades Poland, because Russia dreams of having its old empire back. She was speaking to the UK Sky News earlier today. She said that more robust sanctions will be needed to halt Russia's actions, and that countries like Germany and France could be doing more in terms of imposing sanctions on Russia, particularly in the energy sector, as so far they only appear to look like half measures.
The Russians are really pushing on the borders, and I think it's going to be very little time before they start attacking Poland. Ukraine relies most on the UK and on the US. To be honest, these are the two strategic partners that have always been around through all of the 8 years of war that Russia has been waging against Ukraine. Today, the UK has, not only the opportunity, but also in my view, the responsibility to become the leader of the anti-Putin coalition, which is forming in Eastern Europe. Yesterday, in the speeches we heard from Russian TV presenters, which are essentially the Ruperts, the microphones of the Kremlin, the message was very, very clear that after Ukraine, Russia is not about to stop, and that they are going to continue their invasion across the eastern bloc of countries to get back that big Russian empire they all dream about. Essentially, that is a declaration of war on European states and on NATO member states. Before it's too late, I feel that this anti-Putin coalition formed of Baltic states, of Poland, of Georgia possibly, although Georgia has been very, very quiet these days, surprisingly, to see how we can move more sanctions, more robust sanctions against Russia, especially with certain countries who took half measures. Germany, France, the major countries, they're not doing nearly as much as they could be doing. The same goes for the purchase of Russian oil and gas. Okay, Germany made the decision yesterday to stop with the purchases of oil and coal, but gas still remains a big one.
Well, President Volodymyr Zelensky today visited wounded soldiers being treated in a military hospital in Ukraine. The video released by the Ukrainian Presidential Press Service shows some of the soldiers said to have been wounded in Hostomel and Irpin, the two cities where fierce fighting against Russian troops took place. It was uploaded on. And then we also have a video of defiant Ukrainians protesting against Russia's invasion of Ukraine. It happened earlier today in the city of Kherson, and Russian servicemen watched them from a distance near military vehicles. The Ukrainians chanted and waved flags, and traffic signs were painted with the Ukrainian colors of yellow and blue. One woman tied herself to a post in protest while a flag flew from the top of a building in the city. According to the deputy head of the local council in Kherson, Russian occupying forces are planning to stage a pseudo-referendum in the southern Ukrainian port city of Kherson to create a breakaway region. Kherson was captured by Russian forces following the start of the invasion on February 24th, but pro-Ukrainian protesters have taken to the streets of the city to protest the invasion.
КНР. Хуй на рыло расшифровывается, а не Херсон. Вот, смотрите, украинский флаг. Какой у нас. И они хотят...
Well, so much has been going on with the protests, with evacuations from Ukraine. More Nigerians have been evacuated, from cities where there has been fierce fighting, thanks to the ceasefire announced and agreed on by Russia and Ukraine last week. But concerns remain for Nigerians in Kherson, where we saw that protest. A lot of them say they cannot get out of the city. But I want to bring in the people who are behind the scenes of this conflict. Nigerians helping to provide monies for the welfare of those stuck inside. Daniel Onyekwere and Fumi Adeleye Oladejo are co-founders of Diaspora Relief Fund, a collective of members across the Pan-African diaspora deeply concerned with the difficulty experienced by Black people in their attempt to escape war conditions currently unfolding in Ukraine. We'll speak to Danielle first. She's in Dallas, Texas. Danielle, thank you for joining me on the program today, and I really appreciate your taking your time. What's irked your interest, spiked your interest in, the situation in Ukraine and made you think you had to do something about it?
Thank you for having me. What sparked my interest was initially I got on Twitter and there was a space going on, and I joined in on the space to participate and just listen in on everything that was going on. And the groups that I joined their space spoke about needing volunteers. So when they requested for volunteers, they were like, oh, they had volunteers that they needed people for social media, or they needed people for just anything in general, just to assist. And I volunteered. So from starting with that, I kind of got all involved in it. I spent like 11 hours responding to a group of over like 3,000 people in a chat. And I realized like the need, like people were needing funds, people were needing help evacuating. There was just a huge need of people trying to get out. And I was just like almost like overtaken by the amount of people that needed help. And from there, we just decided, like me and Fumi, we joined together and we're like, okay, let's start up this diaspora relief. We started diaspora relief. We started essentially wanting to help Nigerians, but then when people started joining our spaces, they were like, well, can you help this nationality? Can you help Ghanaians? Can you help Tanzanians? Can you help South Africans? We told them, like, we are down to help anybody. We just want to help people get out of Ukraine. So that's how we started. And we, got on board. Some people volunteered, joined in, and they were able to help us do the GoFundMe. They were help us get just get started off the ground. So a lot of the people in our group have all been volunteers. I know we saw a video. I think the sparking moment for us was when we saw a video of Black people, particularly Nigerians, trying to get on the bus or get on the train, and they were being pushed off not to get on the train because of, racism and stuff. So that's what sparked our interest. And we were like, you know what, let's do this. We had no idea what we were getting into. It's been a lot, but we're in here, we're still sticking it through, and we've been able to help some people so far. So that keeps us going.
And where did you get the most responses from, Danielle? Within Ukraine, where did you have people crying out the most, asking for help?
I would say the most recent was our Sumi crew. Our Sumi group were the people that reached out, and they were just like, we don't want food. We don't want anything. Just get us out of here. And they talked about, there were different reports of like no way in, no way out, bridges being bombed and all these news that we got, that we heard. And then I think when we saw that there was a way out through the Red Cross, the Indian Red Cross were able to bring supplies in. That's when we're like, okay, hold on. How many people are here? Let's try to figure out how many. And I think it was about like maybe 400 and something Nigerian. And majority of them are students. Majority of them are minors. And there's no help. There was nobody coming to help them. So when we got the Sumi crew and everybody got all in a chat and we put them all in a chat, that's when we realized like those were the biggest need at the time. But after handling the Sumi situation, now it's moved on to Kherson, which is now the new group. So I think they're finding their ways to reach out to us on social media and let us know like, hey, this is how many people are here. This is how many people that need help. Can you guys assist?
And Fumi joins us now in this conversation. Fumi Adeleye Oladejo. She's in Maryland in the United States. Fumi, great to see you. And just been hearing from Daniela. We've just been hearing from Danielle, the work that both of you have been doing and, how you're reaching out to people. I wanted to talk about the people in Kherson who haven't heard anything about, evacuations. They're pretty much in a very tight corner. How exactly are you helping them?
So the Kherson group is literally, we just found out about that a few days ago after we pulled the Sumi group out. And then we went on, I think CNN Africa had a space, and I went to speak. And then one of the guys came on there to speak about Kherson. So it wasn't getting media attention. So what we're planning now is just strategy. The same strategy we used with Sumi is to try and see how we can negotiate green corridors with the Red Cross and also with the government of Ukraine. Just keep putting them in the media, because what helped Sumi was a lot of media attention. We kept asking them to do videos, post it out. We were in contact with the student union leaders. But with this particular situation, it's we have to get them that same noise with the media so that the media can pick it up, and we can hopefully be there when because obviously we can't even take over. We can't be in the conversation. We're not strong enough or powerful enough or connected enough to be in such war negotiations. So the Red Cross literally has to be on it and help us out. And one of the things that me and IJ were talking about before we got on this call was we looked at the map of Kherson, and we found out that it's literally close to the port. So we're now seeing if we can also give that information to the Red Cross, let them know that maybe they can do a sea evacuation rather than a land one, if the land one will not work out, because these people are heavily traumatized already.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. On Friday, we spoke to Jerry, who is in Kherson, and he gave us, an insight into the situation there, how it's really blocked off from everywhere else. They're afraid they may not make it through the fighting going on where they are. And yes, you're right, it's close to the port, and that might be an avenue to explore. But what is the most need that you find, with the people there? I know with Sumi, some other groups also helping with relief for people in Ukraine. They were helping out with, pocket monies, monies for groceries and just basic supplies and so on, just to keep them going. Is that also your focus?
Yes, it's a big focus for us to also have raised the funds once they get out to be able to, because the Red Cross will only put them to safety. They won't literally get to where they need to continue life. So they'll just pull them out, and we would need to get them from wherever they pull them to a sane place. So we are already in works of we have a GoFundMe page. We have the Cash App links and other ways that we're trying to raise money to have it so that when they get out, we can always put them over to Budapest. And then from Budapest, try to get them to Germany, depending on, because one of the guys that I spoke with yesterday, his name is Dari, and he's literally trying to give up. And one of the things I told him was just encourage him and prayed with him and told him that all will be well. How that will happen, I don't really know, but I believe, we serve a big God, and I know that there's nothing God cannot do. So once they get out, we are working so hard to make sure that all they need to transition is available. So with the SUMI students, we give them the option of going back to Nigeria or just staying and allowing us to figure out the next course of action for them. And what we've been able to negotiate is schools in Germany, schools in I just got off another call not too long ago with somebody in Budapest that is saying she's ready to be a counselor to help them begin to process the ones that have stayed back into schools in Budapest, and also work on scholarships for them so they don't have to pay so much out of pocket, and also try and get the school fees down to the same value with what they were paying in Ukraine, because Budapest is more expensive than Ukraine. So this is one of the things that
we'd love. Sorry to interrupt, but we'd love to hear more about what you're saying. We need to go on a break now. When we come back, our conversation continues with you and with Danielle on this work that you're doing with Nigerians and Africans and those who need help getting out of Ukraine. Do stay with us, ladies, and stay with us, our viewers. Welcome back to the program. Our focus on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Conflict, as some people prefer to call it. Two young ladies are doing great work in Ukraine from far, far away in the United States. Danielle Onyekwere and Fumi Adeleye Oladejo are both co-founders of Diaspora Relief, a GoFundMe that's raising funds for Nigerians and other Africans who are stuck in Ukraine trying to get out. Fumi, before the break, you were telling me about the support you're providing to some of these people who are there in some of these volatile cities, and you mentioned trying to help them to resettle in schools around outside of Ukraine, possibly Poland and Germany, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes. So Greg is unfortunately not here, but Greg has been working with a great ally in Germany, and we have close to 200. We had 300 spaces initially, but we've filled it up with 100 people already in Germany that they've taken in, and they're going to let them stay there for a while, decide if they want to be in Germany. And what they will do is, after they spend that first month of testing the waters, if they like Germany, then they will be able to process them into, I think first step is the immigration documents, and then also getting them into school, and also trying to get, scholarship for them to go to school in Germany to continue. So it's a lot of work behind the scene. We have a great team that is focusing on resettling these students back into school in the European Union, because this majority of these students are medical doctors, and from what I know, 20% of the NIH is Black doctors, and these doctors go to school in Ukraine because it's just cheaper and it's more affordable, and the system there is very, very good. So even if the world refuses to sleep on this, there will be a backlash in the coming years, when we're already suffering with shortages of doctors. So in the coming years, without these doctors able to finish the education, there will really be a big problem. So that's why we decided to not only think about getting them out of Ukraine, but also giving them the chance to link them with opportunities to complete their education.
Yeah. Danielle, is there at any point at which you're liaising with the parents or the wards, of these students to make these decisions about resettlement and, where they continue their education?
Right, absolutely. We also had a meeting today where we talked about we can't make these decisions without the parents, right? Essentially, these are minors that we're dealing with. So we do talk to the parents. We kind of let them know a lot of them have fears. They want their kids to come back to Nigeria, but we kind of had to almost like reestablish that confidence and reestablish that trust to let them know that, hey, we got you, like we have you all the way. So they have questions that they want to know, like, oh, where are they going to be? Are they going to be okay? Are they going to have food? What about their papers? All those things. So we answer those questions for them. So we are in contact with majority of the parents, and then the ones that we're not, we're trying to get in contact with them by this weekend, because some of the kids in Sumi are set to move out to Germany by next week. So we don't make the decisions for them. We kind of talk to the parents, figure out where their heads is at, answer all the questions that they have, and then we let them ultimately make the decision. And then once they make the decision, we go from there.
I'm wondering, how, you guys are reacting to some of the stories coming out of Kherson. For example, one of the Nigerian students who's there, Jerry, just sent us a video about a missile that apparently dropped close enough to them. You see the thing explode. You see, everything that's going on and all of that. And then we hear from the Nigerian government, the Nigeria Diaspora Commission, to be exact, that, there will be evacuations starting tomorrow from Kherson. I don't know if you're also privy to information like that.
As of the moment, no, we haven't heard anything, and the students that we've spoken to, we haven't heard anything either. So if there's an evacuation going on, that would be great. That would be great, because this morning I actually spoke to one of the students, Victor. We had a long conversation, and we were trying to look at the map and figure out a way out and figure out a way around, and trying to find out more information about possible evacuation attempts that have been made. And to us, I won't even, to be very sincere with you, it is very frustrating, especially when you're from here trying to coordinate a place you've never been. So I ended up having a headache after the first call today, trying to figure out, okay, can we go through here? Nope, we can't. Can we go through here? No, we can't. Can we go through here? No, we can't. Like looking at the map and breaking it down. So we work with them, when it comes to the evacuation plan, because for example, when the Sumi situation, they got taken from the Red Cross from Sumi to Poltava. And then we had to figure out an evacuation plan from Poltava to Budapest. So this is also what we do. We kind of coordinate a route with them from wherever they are or wherever they get dropped off all the way through. So if there's an evacuation possible, that's great news. I can't wait to hear more information about that. And then we just take it on from there. We go for wherever the Red Cross stops, and then we continue on further to safety. So, it's personally, it's been a lot. We've had a lot of tears. We've had a lot of headaches. We've had a lot of cries, a lot of yelling, but we're trying to hang in here because, if we're in the situation, I would hope somebody on the other side would be fighting this much for me as well.
And this next question is for both of you. I know you both have spoken to Victor this morning. We were supposed to have him on the program as well, but the connection, I guess, where he is a bit spotty, so he couldn't join us. What has he told you about, welfare and, how they're able to have access to supplies and, groceries and stuff like that?
You want to answer that or me?
It's fine. So,
okay, for me.
Yeah.
So, nothing. When we spoke to him 2 days ago, he said they were cooking with firewood because there was no light. There was nothing. And as of today, they've depleted a majority of their food supply is like literally low. And they're just waiting for help. Like they just want to get out. Imagine you cooking with firewood in 2022 in a foreign country, and trying to keep warm, trying to gather up and stay warm. So majority of their supplies are running low. And that's one of my major concerns, is if there's an evacuation plan or if there's a way we can even get supplies through to them, we can all know that, we can take a pause and reassess the situation, and hopefully something will happen. So this is like a cry out to who can get them resources because there's water, there's a port there, but they're not letting food come through, and
Yeah, they're
they
not
have
go in or out.
in and out. So they have very little resources left, and it's triggering them. It's increasing their trauma levels as we speak.
What are they eating anyway?
Ukrainian
Yeah, Ukrainian food. I think I had one of them tell me they were like their stomach hurts because they're not used to this kind of food. But the major problem too is Kherson is more difficult than Sumy was. Sumy was a lot easier because it was all dorms and they were close to each other. But Kherson's situation is there's outside villages and they can't get to each other. So people in certain villages aren't able to get to Kherson city itself because the Russian military isn't letting them. So when it comes to an evacuation attempt, it's kind of more difficult because it's like, how do we get all these people all in one spot so we can evacuate them all at once, especially when they're not being let through? So, I don't know how, I don't see how we can be able to accomplish this by ourselves. We definitely need the Nigerian government on board. We need Red Cross on board. We need everybody on board. And in this situation, it's not only, particularly Sumy was majority Nigerians, but now we're dealing with Arabians as well. So we have people from Egypt, people from Yemen, people from Syria, people from Morocco, everywhere that we're trying to help. So it's a lot more difficult because it's a lot of different government bodies that's going to be attached to this one task.
So you both, established this GoFundMe. How do the funds get to the people in Kherson?
So we have a disbursement person. So we've been working with Doi from the beginning. Doi is in Poland. She's a student in Poland. And so when this whole stuff started in February, towards the end, Doi was on board. So we would send the money to Doi and Doi would, through her WISE account. So IJ is in charge of finance. So IJ will get the money from, we've not even been able to touch the GoFundMe yet because we have some kind of bureaucracy going on with that. But we're collecting money with Cash App and with Zelle. So once we get the money, IJ transfers it to the WISE account. And from the WISE account, she transfers it to Doi's WISE. And Doi is able to transfer it to the people in Ukraine, the people in Sumy, like literally anywhere. Because we had people in Poland in their accommodation, we were able to pay for that. So once we get Kherson people out, getting funds into their hands, it's done, it's sorted, it's like ready to go.
Ladies, thank you so much for speaking with me, and great job you're both doing. We are praying for those in Kherson, just as we did with for those in Sumy. We're praying that everyone gets out, and we do hope this information we're getting about the evacuation starting there really is true, and that they actually get to safety as quickly as possible. Thank you again, Danielle. Thank you, Fumi, and thank you to the millions who are working behind the scenes. And we know that at this point only God can reward you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All hands are on deck to help those trapped and also those who have been able to escape the conflict. Volunteer doctors and psychiatrists are helping displaced Ukrainians, mainly women and children, who are arriving at the city's central station. The people arriving at the station have fled areas of active conflict and bombardments and have had to leave other members of their family behind. For most, their final destination has been Poland. Meanwhile, Poland's President Andrzej Duda says the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine by Russia would be a game changer, and NATO would have to think seriously about how to respond. Asked if the use of chemical weapons by Putin will be a red line for NATO, at which point it has to get involved. Duda says if he uses any weapons of mass destruction, and this will be a game changer in the whole thing. He also said Poland is not transferring fighter jets to Ukraine despite President Volodymyr Zelensky's demands, and that NATO would not enforce a no-fly zone over Ukraine, as it could result in an opening, possibly, of a third world war due to the potential direct confrontation between NATO and Russia, adding that Poland could end up welcoming around 2.5 million refugees if the situation worsens. Staying with more international relief funds, the United Nations Population Fund says invasion of Ukraine by Russia is tearing families apart. Over 2.1 million Ukrainians have now fled to neighboring countries, just half families moving. As the war enters into third week, more than 278,000 Ukrainian citizens have crossed the border into the Republic of Moldova, and almost 100,000 remain in the country, which has its own socio-economic challenges and now hosts the largest number of Ukrainian refugees per capita. UNFPA Executive Director Dr. Natalia Kanem met with Ukrainian women and girls at the Manes Stadium and Mold Expo Center in Chisinau, the capital of Moldova. Both locations had to be transformed overnight into temporary shelters for Ukrainian refugees.
It's a tragedy, and it's a tragedy of huge numbers that Europe has not experienced since the Second World War. We've had over 4,000 births to Ukrainian women since the conflict escalated 2 weeks ago. My team from UNFPA is busy protecting pregnant women from the risk of childbirth, even in the middle of a war, even in the middle of a refugee situation. We are also working on the dignity of women through supplies, such as the menstrual supplies which are available. We're also making sure that women who need contraception can continue their chosen method even while they're moving. And we're also working to bring mobile health services. These are services that can go to the border when she comes in during intake, and it's also part of a process for universal access to sexual and reproductive health. For the country of Moldova, it's been a huge act of generosity. This is the country bordering Ukraine per capita that has taken the most refugees. It's not a wealthy country, but it's a country with a huge heart. Moldova cannot take this expense on its own shoulders, and we all have to step up and help.
Now more on those doctors and psychiatrists helping Ukrainians displaced by the fighting, mainly women and children, arriving at the city station, central city station in many of the countries around them. The people arriving have fled areas of active conflict and bombardment.
People are arriving here directly from the bombing cities to Lviv, 24 hours in the trains without possibility to visit toilets or to make a movement, so they are running away from this awful, horrible situations, and they are arriving here like in shock state. This is acute trauma, and we are trying here to stabilize, to provide shelters, to provide some safety space. Quite possible to predict that the consequence of these events will be much more widespread, and we will need much more psychosocial support and mental health care for all population.
We talked about Poland's President Andrzej Duda earlier, saying the use of chemical weapons in Ukraine by Russia would be a game changer, and NATO would have to think seriously about how to respond. He spoke about a red line that this would cause for NATO, at which point it has to get involved in the crisis.
We are trying to help the people who are in this big need, who are the victims of this catastrophe which is going on in Ukraine. We feel it as our human responsibility to help them. And what we are doing is we are transporting them to Denmark, where we have accommodation for them, and they'll be allowed to.
I do apologize for the mix-up. That was not the Polish president. But coming up after the break, my chat with Doug Brooks, founder of International Stability Operations Association, on developments in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Stay with us. Welcome back to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Tragedy after the war. A bus carrying around 50 Ukrainians today went off the road in Italy and overturned, leaving one person dead and several others injured. The accident occurred on the A14 highway between Cesena and Rimini, on the north and east coast. According to firefighters, the bus ran off the road, overturned at around 5:45 in the morning without involving other vehicles. One person died in the accident after being trapped under the vehicle. Police in Russia say a U.S. journalist, Brent Renaud, has been shot dead in the town of Irpin outside of Kyiv. Kyiv's police chief Andriy Nebyatov said he had been targeted by Russian soldiers. 2 other journalists were injured and taken to hospital. It's the first reported death of a foreign journalist covering the war in Ukraine. Photographs are circulating showing a press ID for Renaud that was issued by the New York Times. In a statement, the newspaper said it was saddened to hear of Renaud's death, but that he had not been working for the newspaper in Ukraine. He last worked for the newspaper in 2015. According to the New York Times, the press ID he was wearing in Ukraine had been issued years ago. It was not immediately clear who Renaud was working for in Ukraine. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says the U.S. will impose appropriate consequences on Russia. News of the death was shocking and horrifying, and U.S. officials will be consulting with Ukrainian officials to determine how this happened. Another American journalist was also shot and wounded by Russian forces in the town of Irpin in Ukraine's Kyiv region. It was the same attack that killed Brent Renaud. Speaking from the stretcher before being taken into surgery, Juan gave his account of what happened during the attack.
Tell me, please, what is your name?
Juan.
Juan? Where are you from?
The U.S.
U.S. What happened to you?
We crossed the first bridge in Irpin. We're going to film other refugees leaving, and we got into a car. Somebody offered to take us to the other bridge, and we crossed a checkpoint, and they start shooting at us. So the driver turned around, and they kept shooting. It's 2 of us. My friend is Brent Renaud, and he's been shot and left behind.
And how is he?
I don't know.
You don't know. You don't know what happened to you?
I saw him being shot in the neck, and we got split, and I got pulled into the...
And who brought you here?
An ambulance, I don't know.
And with Russia claiming that over 130 people died in that attack on the military base of Ukraine near Poland, the Yavoriv International Center for Peacekeeping and Security at Ukraine saying just over 30 people were killed. The red line that NATO possibly says would be the condition for which it may be joining this war may not have been breached. So says Doug Brooks, the founder of International Stability Operations Association, supporting professionalism, standards and advocating more effective applications by the international community who spent a lot of time in Ukraine. He spoke to me earlier about the situation in Ukraine, the proximity of this attack to Poland, and the possibility of Russia using chemical weapons. Do you think Russia wants NATO to be involved in this war, NATO and the United States?
Well, NATO and the United States are involved in the war. Obviously, they're shipping weapons. They've been doing training for the Ukrainian military, excellent training for ever since 2014. A direct confrontation with Russia, I think Russia does not want to see that. Just to put this in perspective, Germany has just decided to increase its defense spending by 25%, so 1/4. That 25% is equivalent of the entire Russian military budget. And that's just 1 out of 30 countries in NATO. And a lot of countries are increasing their military budget. So I think Russia definitely does not want to have a direct confrontation with NATO any more than NATO wants to confront Russia.
Many have wondered, Doug, if Russia would find some excuse to introduce chemical weapons into this war. What would be the consequences of that?
I think that would be terrible for everybody. Certainly the U.S., who has been very open with their intelligence, has been saying that the Russians are toying with this idea of using chemical weapons. I think it would be a disaster for everybody. The U.S. and the West has basically said this would be a red line for them. This is something that should not be done. there's a lot of reasons from a tactical perspective that you don't use chemical weapons. It's hard to understand why the Russians would in this particular case, unless Putin, I should say, is simply in it for vengeance. But I sincerely hope, and I think everybody sincerely hopes, that the Russians do not take that step.
Now, speaking of Putin, I'm glad you mentioned him. He's promised, sometime last week, he said that the worst is yet to come in this war. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, he's probably right. The war has, I think the Russians have been very disappointed by the results so far. They've not been able to take Kiev, the capital in Ukraine. They've not been able to take any of the large cities. And the resistance from the Ukrainians, I think, has astonished the Russians. Also, the Russians have found out that their military is not nearly as professional as they thought. So this has been very, very bad for them. And their alternatives at this point are to withdraw or to negotiate a withdrawal, or perhaps become more brutal. And some sources are saying that they're running out of their guided weapons or guided munitions, meaning that the weapons they'll have less are going to be the more area effect, which is to say these multiple rocket launchers and so on. Essentially, you're not aiming at a target, a specific target, so much as an area, which could be very well a city, as we've seen in some of the videos coming out of the conflict. So yes, it could become much, much more brutal. We hope that does not go there. The Russian military is feeling this one. It's not going well, and the hope is that maybe saner heads will prevail in Russia, and they will come up with a better solution than simply brutalizing their neighbor.
There's already a case opened against Russia in the International Criminal Court on war crimes. Would you say that Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine?
Yes, there are definitely some war crimes that we're seeing. Now, I think it's always important that you never blame on malice what can be explained by incompetence. And again, we have a Russian military that has turned out to be far less professional than I think most analysts expected. And so a lot of their use of force has been indiscriminate. And perhaps they're not trying to commit war crimes, but these things are happening. There are some cases where they very deliberately were committing war crimes. All this will have to be judged in the future. And I think it's important for the Russians to keep in mind, especially the Russian military, that they are going to get judged. And if there is, let's say, changes in the government in Russia, it's possible that some of the military people that are involved in these things could end up being tried for these crimes.
Some reports, Doug, out of Ukraine say that one of the abducted mayors has been replaced and his successor has addressed residents in the Russian-occupied territory. Does this further prove that Russia does indeed intend to take over Ukraine, sack the government, and install a puppet government?
Yeah, again, I think this invasion was really about regime change. They do not like having the democratic government down on their border. It is a threat to the Russian authoritarian regime under Putin. So this is something they need to that they felt they needed to address. And at this point, it looks like Ukraine, which, as everyone knows, is split between the Ukrainian-speaking and the Russian-speaking populations, but they've really come together against Russia. And Russia has already controlled a chunk of Ukraine. They've occupied the Crimea. They have their independent republics that only they recognize along the border or in part of Ukraine. So I think their original goals after the regime change were simply to make sure that there were these little buffer states, puppet states between them and the bulk of Ukraine. But I don't think even that may stand at this point. It's just not going well for the Russian military.
You can watch more on the interview with Doug Brooks on Diplomatic Channel. It airs at 8:30 p.m. on Sky 518 and right here in Nigeria at 11:30 p.m. Pope Francis today issued his toughest condemnation yet of the war in Ukraine, saying the unacceptable armed aggression must stop. Speaking to thousands of people in St. Peter's Square for his Sunday blessing, Pope Francis also said the bombing of hospitals and other civilian targets It's barbaric and no valid strategic reason. And as the prayers continue in Rome, residents attended church services in Kiev as the sound of bells mixed with air raid sirens in the surrounding empty streets. As far as he gets the capital, some soldiers also attended the service with military chaplains, blessing them and their rifles outside.
Адже віра в Бога дає нам саму силу.
Keeping hope alive in the midst of a gloomy situation, the Odessa National Academic Theatre Orchestra performing in an open-air concert titled Free Sky to support President Volodymyr Zelensky's call for a no-fly zone over Ukraine and to stop the war. Residents of Odessa's Primorsky district had a chance to hear the orchestra perform Ukraine's national anthem and other classical pieces. In a speech broadcast on Saturday to dozens of European cities taking part in a day of protest, Zelensky said 79 children have been killed in Ukraine since the beginning of the war and calls for more sanctions against Moscow and a no-fly zone. And that's the program today. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.